Hello, friends and enemies, heroes and villains, welcome to Epic Realms. Tonight's guest is a Ringo Award nominated comic book writer. She's also an editor and letterer and has worked for Marvel, Image, Dark Horse, DC, just to name a few. Please welcome the uncanny Erica Schultz to Epic Realms. How are you doing?
You said uncanny as if you were going to say the unkind, and I was like, "Oh, he's already going to set it up. Great."
I meant to say uncanny, but it just kind of came out as a word jumble because I've got a cough drop in my mouth because I've been still fighting this aftermath of COVID. It's not fun.
Yeah,
It's two
it's
months afterwards, and I'm still coughing like there's something wrong with. Well, there is something wrong with me, but
there's something wrong with everybody. I'm pretty sure. I mean, if you get on any social media, you will find that out.
that is true. That is very very
Yes.
much true. I have a question. So everybody has this story of getting into the comic book industry, and no two stories are alike. So
I
I'm kind of
know.
curious, how did you get into the business of comic books? How did that kind of happen? Because I can't imagine. You and I are about the same age, and I kind of have an idea of what the industry's been like over the course of the few years. So I'm guessing you have a unique tale to tell.
Well, I've abridged this story so
Okay.
much that people have like accused me of like lying because I've abridged it. Because in the beginning, I would tell the entire long story, and it like started with a car accident and everything. Um, and I just kind of abridge it to
Yeah.
like I was working in I got laid off like everybody else in 2008. I was working in an art studio that happened to also do comics,
Okay.
and I partnered up with one of the other artists there and wrote some original stories. One of them happened to be a series called M3. And Vicente Alcazar and I put out 12 issues over about 3.5, 4 year period on our own. And as a writer, you kind of have to make a comic in order for it to be your portfolio piece, whereas artists can show up with portfolios and
Yeah.
just, within 2 to 3 page turns, a good editor is going to know whether or not they want to hire you. Whereas as a writer, you have to either pay for an artist or partner with an artist or whatever. And so M3 became my portfolio piece, and I would give it to editors and give it to other pros and stuff like that. And then it takes a while. I mean, I've been doing this since 2008, and I'm a 14-year overnight success, almost 15-year overnight success. Um, so, little by little, you would get sort of, I did a lot of work for Dynamite in around like 2014, 2015. That helped a lot too. In 2016, DC was starting up what they called their new talent showcase, or their talent development workshop.
Okay.
Um, but I was part of the pilot program for that. So when they when they actually, rolled it out, they had people apply for it. In the pilot program, they came to us and actually asked us if we wanted to be a part of it. So that was cool. I was able to write a Hawk Girl short. Sunny Lou drew it, which was great. And I met a lot of people through that: Vita Ayala, Chris Bella, Joel Jones, Meredith Finch, Mike Morici was part of it. Um, and you just little by little, you try to add more snow to the snowball as you keep working on it. And something that always stuck with me is that you're never working on the job that you're working on. You're always working toward the next, especially with me because I am a full-time freelancer. I know a lot of people that work in comics, they have a day job, which is great. I mean, I had a day job for years um, while I was doing comics. But now I'm a full-time freelancer, so I'm always working toward the next job
Yeah.
because, bills come in every month. So
Did you collect comics when you were younger?
I didn't collect them. I would just steal what my brother had. So I have an older brother, and he was always bringing home. At the time, it was Claremont was writing X-Men, and whether it was John Byrne or Jim Lee or Terry Austin or Dave Cockrum or whoever the artist was partnered with him. And I know I said that non-chronologically. I'm just waiting for the comments, um, anticipating.
Yeah.
But
I, I think we'll be good.
yeah. So I would just read what he brought home pretty much, and it was mostly X-Men, some Batman, a little bit of Spidey here and there.
Okay.
So that was really what I was sort of growing up with, and then X-Men '92 they came out with a cartoon in '92. It was great because it was taking, I mean, they obviously sort of sanitized a lot of the work, but it was taking those stories and putting an actual voice to it.
Yeah.
And one thing I always thought was interesting was that when the Justice League cartoon show came out in 2000, 2001, um, we had already had, you know, Batman the animated series, Superman the animated series, but we had these other characters that you now had a voice to. You had Jon Stewart, you had Shayera Hall, you had Flash and everything, and you now had this voice. So I found that when I was reading comics, I was like hearing those voices. So,
Yeah.
you know, when I would go back to X-Men, I would be hearing the voices from, you know, the X-Men the animated series because it gave you, you know, it wasn't like hearing your own voice as you're reading it. You now have a voice to sort of apply to it, which I thought
Yeah.
was always kind of cool.
And even kind of an attitude depending on the character, because even in voice acting,
Yeah.
there's character that comes through in the way the voice does things.
Yeah, I mean, intonation when you're reading a balloon, even if it's got whether it has the italicized text or the bolded text, intonation is everything. And especially in terms of when you're creating a comic and you know whether you're drawing it or you're the writer looking at the art, um, the acting on the face, the body language, the attitude of the character, even in a silent panel really speaks volumes. So hearing, I mean, obviously it wasn't one-to-one dialogue from the comic to
Right.
you know, to the cartoon, but hearing some of the very similar back and forth, some of the similar exchanges between characters, you could feel sort the emotional beats. You could also, you know, understand the personality of the character, the attitude, how they would react in a situation like this. So you sort of like start filling in the blanks, you know.
Yeah. As an editor and letterer, how much did you know before coming into the comic book industry about how you had to arrange that kind of stuff? Because you were talking about, the emphasis on the voice and working with the picture and stuff like that.
I when I was working at a studio, I was basically just doing background art. I was inking, I was doing background art, I was doing digital cleanups, I was doing color assists and things
Okay.
like that. I basically taught myself lettering because the studio needed a letterer because they wanted to start up doing their own comics again. So I basically taught, you know, I got a lettering template from one of the letterers who had done a book that uh, they had previously put out, and I just started really, you know, working on it and trying to break it down and understand the mechanics of it, sort of reverse engineer.
Yeah.
Um, and when it came to the writing, I mean, I'd always written when I was younger, and it was just a matter of looking at the formatting, looking at the pacing of a story. You know, when you pace a story for a film or you pace a story for a TV show or you pace a story for a novel, it's very different than doing a comic because, especially periodical, especially monthly, because you get a small amount of pages. I mean, your average monthly comic is 20 to 24 pages,
Yeah.
whereas a novel can be, you know, I think if it's under 150 it's considered a novella, but you know 150 pages to tell a whole story, whereas most story arcs in comics are going to be 100 pages.
Yeah.
So so the art is obviously doing a lot of work, because in novels you're talking about so and so thought this
Yeah.
and everything like that, but it's a matter of like trying to pace the story. How much information do you give the reader at one time? What bits of information you give the reader at that particular time, and how the story unfolds itself. I was on a panel at a convention about 6 7 years ago, and I was the only comic book creator on the panel. Everyone else was novelists, and uh, a lot of them kind of looked down their nose at me, which I thought was kind of funny because I had no idea who any of them were, whoever
Right.
any of them were. I
Right.
mean, like I'm not illiterate, but you would think I am because I don't read nearly as much as I should, I guess.
Which is
But I
strange because
walked,
so many of them go, I really wish my book was adapted to a comic. You'd think.
well, you know, I mean, come on. So I walked in And it was a very large panel. I mean, I like to be on a panel with like 5 people, including the moderator. And this panel had like 7 panelists and a moderator. Like it was a stacked panel. And I go up, and the 3 or 4 steps next to the stage, and I'm introducing myself. And you can tell that they're like trying to place where they may or may not have heard my name. I made no bones about it. I don't know who any of y'all people are. So I was just like, hi, nice to meet you, nice to meet you, nice to meet you. And the room was packed. So I was like, these people must be pretty up there if, this you have a room of, I don't know, it was probably 600 people.
Wow.
And I was like, wow, they're not here to see me. Um, so I go to sit down I go all the way to the one side of the panel. I go to sit down, and the guy who I would sit next to goes, no, 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 this seat is reserved. And I said, okay. So I'm sitting at literally the last chair on the panel.
Okay.
And there's a space, and then there's all these authors, and then there's the moderator. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, I don't know if I can curse.
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
But I was like, this is bullshit.
Yeah.
I'm like, come on. Like, I'll wipe my ass with your novels, you people. So what I found out was that there was this, and again, another person, I had no clue who they were, but there was this big shot, like who I would consider like a Claremont, like Alan Moore kind of big shot character,
Okay.
or person, who comes in like 5 minutes late. And as he walks down the aisle, people are getting up and they are clapping and they are freaking out. And I'm like, oh, so this is why there's 500-600 people in this room, because of this dude.
Okay.
So he comes in and everybody at the table gets up and they're all like shaking his hand and being like, they're all like fanboying and fangirling out from this dude. Still, no clue who this dude is.
Okay.
And he sits down next to me because there's this void.
Yeah.
And he was very polite. Hi, it's nice to meet you. Hi, how's it going? And I'm like, and I kind of whisper, I was like, I don't think I'm supposed to be here. And he's like, it's fine, don't worry. So he starts talking, and everybody on the panel is wrapped with every word that comes out of his mouth.
Okay.
And they're all turned, it's all profile shots. And because how they take all the photos, the press photos from the back, but it's all profile shots and this one guy. And then me looking like I don't even know why I'm here. And then it was Q&A time, and I barely spoke because anytime I did to speak, someone else would talk over me.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to be that jerk and be like, I'm sorry, could you shut the hell up for a moment? I have something to say. I didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
And the panel, well, the panel was also in Salt Lake City, and I didn't want to start stepping on people. I'm like, this is a very Christian city. For all I know, they're gonna, burn me at the stake by the end of the weekend. So there was a question that someone posed, in the Q&A.
Yeah.
And they had an extra long Q&A because of this dude. And to this day, I can't tell you what his name was.
Okay.
But because of this dude, they had an extra long Q&A.
People need to go and look on the Google now and find out.
It was Salt Lake Comic-Con March 2016. It was an author panel, and that's all I can remember. And there was like 7 panelists. I might have been the 8th.
Okay.
There was a very large group of panelists, and they were all novelists except me. And
so you were the special one. All right.
I wasn't supposed to be there. Like, it was like that scene from Clerks. I'm not even supposed to be here today. I wasn't even supposed to be.
Great reference.
I don't know why. I don't even know why I was there. I think it's because I was a special guest of the convention, and they were like, well, we got to throw her on something. So somebody asked a question, and it was they're looking right at this dude, but it was a general question. And I jumped in. I was like, I am not getting off of this panel without giving my opinion on something.
Right.
And I like literally, and he and I were sharing a mic, and I almost jumped in his lap to get in front of that microphone. And I was just like, whoa, and it was a question about character. And so I was talking about how character is very important. But in my opinion, storytelling is three things: it's character, it's world, and it's plot. And they have to be in coordination with each other. They have to service each other. And it has to be like a recycling logo. You know, they've got to go one to the other to the other. Um, and I know that a mistake a lot of young writers do. And, you know, and especially on passion projects, you will get so focused on one of those three that the other two are going to fall to the wayside and
Yeah.
get much weaker.
Yeah.
Um, and so I finally got like my 90-second spiel out, and everybody on the panel was like, oh, it was apocryphal that I spoke. And he turns and he lean and he's not, and I'm not paying attention because I'm looking right at that person who asked that question. I was like, you asked
Yeah.
this question of me.
Yeah.
And he apparently is, you know, nodding at what I'm saying. And then everybody else
Starts
is
nodding.
now starts nodding. And it was, I mean, it was like Lemmings. Do you remember that old game, Lemmings?
Yeah,
It was
yeah.
like, you know, it was Lemmings. That's exactly what it was. And when I leaned back from the mic, because I was like, yeah, I said my piece. I was like, I wanted to jump up in the air and do like the fist pump, like at the end of like Breakfast Club.
Yeah, yeah.
And I leaned back and I was like, like I did it. And he leans in and he takes the mic. He says, everything she said is absolutely correct. Everything she said. He's like, I have nothing to add to that. That was perfect. And I'm like, yeah.
Yeah, you go, person I don't know.
And then when the panel was over, I stood up, I said, thank you very much. I shook his hand. He's like, it was great meeting you. I mean, you were so insightful. I said, thank you. Still have no clue who he was. And as I was leaving, all the lemmings, oh, it was so nice to meet you. You know, it's so funny. I think it's so difficult to write comics because, you know, you have such little real estate. You only have like what, like 20 pages or something. It's so tough to tell a story, a compelling story in 20 pages. I was like, yeah, I don't know. I don't read novels. And then I just walked away.
Oh,
But it's the truth. I don't read novels because I'm not illiterate, but I'm kind of close to it at this point. But yeah, it was just the most bizarre experience. And I really wish I knew who this dude was, because I would like to say thank you, by the way, for being, you know, a cisgender 60-year-old white dude and saying that I was right. That was very kind of you. Um, on this like bleach Clorox panel of all the white
yeah.
people. I was like, but you know, you might want to smack some of your lemmings, your followers into, you know, like they were like practically bowing to him, like wanting to be his serfs. It was insane. And
Wow.
I was just like, okay, yeah, well, peace out. I was like, I got a table to man. I got to make some money this weekend. Gotta
Well, now I'm
go.
really curious who that was and who was on
I
the
don't know
panel.
who it was.
And
I have
hopefully none of the
no
people that
idea.
were those people have. I can't imagine anyone I've ever had on would be like that, because almost all of them don't have views like that. So I'm guessing.
I mean,
I'm really curious.
this was 2016, so it wasn't like, not everything was comics on
Yeah.
streamers and stuff. So like now I think comics creators get just hint more respect on these author panels, especially, I mean, also a lot of comic creators are writing novels and things like that, like
Yeah.
Chuck Wendig and Alex Segura,
Yeah.
and you know, like
Delilah
Leah
Dawson.
Thompson, Delilah Dawson. You know, I mean, a lot of people are sort of crossing over. I don't, because it's too many words. I
Yeah.
can't do it. But I'm happy staying in my lane.
Yeah.
So
Awesome.
yeah, so if anybody finds out, tweet me and tell me who the dude was, if you could.
I'm
If
really
not, no
I'm
biggie.
super curious now. I'm super curious because
I don't
that
still have the, I
that's a
don't
great
have,
story though.
yeah, I was, it was just very, it was almost like dominoes falling as everybody's like head was just like, you know, and like I said, I almost jumped in his lap to get to that microphone. I was like, it's mine. I'm answering this question.
Do you
You
want to
know,
speak any more on how the industry has changed in the last 20 years and you know, especially from your point of view. I mean, there's like you just mentioned, there's a lot of people, but on that note, you know, I can only imagine that, you know, 10, 15 years ago, it was very much a boys club in
Oh,
the
it's
comic book
still,
industry. But
see, that's the thing is, to a certain extent, it's always been a boys club, and to a certain extent, it probably will always be a boys club if you're talking about American superhero comics. When you're talking about web comics, when you're talking about manga, when you're talking about European comics, it is a much broader demographic. Um, One of the things that I find very interesting whenever I'm on a women in comics panel, which is great. We're a novelty. Can we not be a novelty? But that's just my opinion. I know some people would disagree with that. It's, one hack's opinion.
yeah,
Um, is that women have always been in comics from the absolute beginning. The difference is getting our names on the covers. Women have been in editorial positions, women have been in bullpen positions, women have been in doing the art. Women, I mean, Ramona Fradon is 96 years old. I mean, come on. You're telling me she hasn't been there at the dawn of comics? She's older than Captain America,
yeah,
you know? So there are women have always been there. It's I think the biggest thing is getting your name on the cover of the comic, as opposed to in the credits,
yeah,
whether it's editorial, colors. Chrissy Shiegel. I know I'm mispronouncing, but Chrissy Shiegel, Lynn Varley. These are colorists that were working in the 70s and 80s in comics. Lynn Varley, especially, Frank Miller's ex-wife. I mean, Lynn Varley was the
yeah,
one who colored 300. And, I mean, come on, you're telling me you don't know that name? I mean, yes, now we have Laura Martin and we have these other like fantastic colorists that are really like, you know, big name people, but it's a matter of getting the name on the cover. And I think that's really what people talk about when they say women in comics.
okay,
Because I've been on panels with Louise Simonson. I've been on panels um, with Ramona Fradon. I've been on panels with these women who have been there from the beginning. And their attitude is like, we've always been here. But I think the disconnect is, yeah, you've always been there in a role that is not 100% in the forefront.
yeah. They're not giving
And
that recognition.
you're not giving that recognition, but also I mean, they're not interviewing women for things. Now you'll get women on podcasts. Now you'll get people who are not your typical white dudes on podcasts and such. Back then, they didn't have that. Like you're not interviewing a woman on radio about Marvel Comics, although I don't think they were, interviewing even
Right,
Stan about timely comics on the radio.
right,
Um, so I think that's the thing. The women in comics panels, I do them and that's fine. And, sometimes that's the only panel that I'm on. So I'm not disparaging them convention because, I need the press.
yeah,
Um, but it is kind of like a novelty kind of thing. At the same time, there are plenty of people that will go to a women in comics panel or a non dude in comics panel,
yeah,
and be very inspired by that. And for those few people that get inspired by it, then sure, let's do this because that is the next voice that you don't want to not silence, but you don't want to by not being open, you don't want to make it appear as if they don't have a path. If that
yeah,
makes sense.
yeah, totally, for sure. What drew you when you were younger? What drew you into the comics more, the writing or the art, as compared to obviously now you do a lot of the writing? Was there a one over
Just
the other?
storytelling.
Just the
No, it was
storytelling?
just storytelling.
Okay.
Storytelling in general. Um, Whether it's, I would write short stories, I would draw comics I mean, what kid didn't?
Yeah.
You know, um, it was funny. I was reading an article because the Oscars just happened. I was reading an article about somebody said something about the Fablemans, and they said, "Oh, big deal! You made movies when you were a kid. What kid didn't?" Um, I was like, that's Spielberg you're talking about. Uh, no wonder this interview was an anonymous source.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, I did what any kid did. I told stories. I thought of imaginary worlds. The only difference is, 40 years later, I found a way to make it into a career. Whereas, a lot of times, like we said before, a lot of people do comics on the side and they have, their career, they have their full-time gig. Great. Um, but storytelling in general, the idea of bringing an audience, the idea of being a reader and being brought in, and then the idea of being able to create a world or a story if it exists in the regular world and bringing someone in. Oh, that's sorry, that's a little squeak.
That's all right.
Um, so I'm just gonna slightly be out of frame to make sure that he's happy and he doesn't start nipping my ankles.
That's all right.
Um, and that I think is just very appealing to me, because I think it's transportive. I think it's transformative. I think if you go to a movie theater and you see a film that opens your eyes, or you read a book that takes you someplace you never thought you would ever be. I think that's important because even though you're not physically going to Bangkok or Malaysia or Moscow or wherever, you're being brought there, kind of like astrally projecting yourself through your
Yeah.
imagination,
Yeah.
which I think is kind of cool. It's very powerful.
Yeah. When you're coming up with these stories and you're working with artists, how do you communicate like what you want versus what the artist has to make that vision come to light?
It's not a matter of what I want. Um, when I am working on, say, X-23 or Hallows Eve or something, you're working on a licensed character, you're doing work for hire. Um, you turn around and uh, you give your scripts, and your editor sort of guides you, because your editor, anything with Big Two is, they have basically what they know what's going to happen, 6 to 10 to 14 months, if not more, in advance.
Yeah.
So they will guide you to make sure that the story that you're telling isn't going to uh, in any way create speed bumps for continuity down the road. So when it comes to that, it's a matter of 99% of the time the editor is picking the artist, the editor is picking the cover artist. I mean, I can make suggestions and I can say, reach out to this person, reach out to that person, loved working with this person, kind of thing. Um, but, I'm not such a top tier that the editor's going to be like, oh, yes, we're going to work with so and so. No, it's like, all right, cool. You want to work with these people? We'll check their schedules. And 99% of the time, they don't even check the schedules. Probably they're probably just like, we can get so and so. Let's get so and so.
Yeah.
Um, and when I'm doing an indie work, I don't look at it as I wrote the script, so you have to draw it. Your artist your is not your employee at all. Your artist is your collaborator. And what I always say to the artist is, look, I like there's beats of information, breadcrumbs that we're giving to the audience. So every page has to convey a certain amount of information. If I write 5 panels, but you can convey the same information in 4, do it. If you feel that you need an extra panel, do it. Because I always do a lettering pass. I always look at the art, go back to the script, and see what needs to be tweaked, because the artist may draw an expression, might draw a just some little facial tick that's going to influence the dialogue.
Yeah.
If you don't do a lettering pass and you just take the script as is and just throw it on the art without trying to marry it properly to the art, it's gonna be pretty obvious.
Okay.
You want this to look seamless. You don't want it to look like slapdash. You don't want it to look like I'm a writer and I write this, and you're the artist and you're going to draw that, and you're the letterer and you're going to letter that. No, it has to come together. Like building a good comic is like building a good sandwich. Like every layer has to complement the other and
Yeah.
elevate it,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. For sure. Do you have an artist that you like to work with a lot, or a couple artists that you were like, this is who I'm going to get because they've always been awesome?
Well, I have a cover artist I usually go to. Natasha Alterici is phenomenal. If you have not read her work, Heathen from Vault, please do. I've been doing getting some covers from Skylar Patridge, another phenomenal artist. I mean, I've worked with a couple of artists more than once. I worked with Vicente Alcazar, who we did M3, which was our first comic together. We did a couple of comics together. I think it's because we had worked together. People would come to me and be like, "Oh, I have a screenplay I want to adapt into a comic. Do you have an artist?" And I'd be like, "Well, I just finished working with him. You know, come on in." So I've worked with Vicente many times. But I've also, I mean, Marika Cresta, who did Forgotten Home with me, was fantastic. Carola Borelli, who did Deadliest Bouquet, is fantastic. Amagoya Aguirre, who's currently working with me on Christabel, is amazing. Um, Edgar Salazar, who did X-23, great guy. I got to work with David Lopez on a Moon Knight short. I mean, it's an embarrassment of riches, the incredible talents that I've worked with. Mike Dowling is the interior artist, and he's doing the A covers for Hallows Eve. He's great to work with too. So I really, I'm very, very lucky that the artists that I'm working with are so just collaborative. And I met Edgar Salazar at San Diego Comic Con last year, and he said to me, he goes, "You have an art background, don't you?" And I was like, "Well, I worked at an art studio," because I don't like telling people I worked at an art studio, because then they're going to think, "Oh, you can draw it." I am a serviceable artist. I am not a good artist, and I know which lane to stay in. So I mean, I'll do, like on Christabel, I'm doing color flats to help out Amagoya. And I'm doing, I've done plenty of lettering and things like that. So I don't just write. I mean, I do what needs to be done.
Yeah.
I'm kind of like the caulk that fills in all the cracks. Um, but I'm not going to go out there and start drawing figures, because I know my limitations, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
And I don't have the time nor the inclination to start drawing every day and to get back uh, to a proficiency where I need to be. I don't have the inclination to do that. If I was maybe 10 years younger, maybe I'd say, you know what, screw it. Let me do this. Um, I don't feel like I need to do that. There's plenty of incredible artists that I have worked with, and that um, I hopefully will have the opportunity to work with, that are going to do a much better job than I will. So
Gotcha. Let's talk about a couple of your comics, shall we?
sure, which ones do you want to talk about?
Well, you've got a lot of really good ones. Uh,
Well, thank you. I
so
try not to have any. I'm sure there's a couple of stinkers in there, but
when I'm going through, and obviously I can't say I've read everything you've done, but I was
which
going
is
through and I
fine.
was looking at
I
covers.
haven't read everything I've done. I told you I'm illiterate.
So tell me a little bit about the legacy of Mandrake the Magician, because every time I see that cover, I go, the one that I have on my that I've been posting, I go, this is such a gorgeous looking comic book, and it looks so intriguing and so fun.
Okay,
Tell me about it.
okay. Amelia Vidal
Mm-hmm.
did the covers for Legacy of Mandrake, and Amelia's big time now, because they were working on What If season 1, and now they're working on What If season 2. So much big time that when I reached out to say, "Hey, could you do covers?" I can't. I'm too busy. I'd love to work with you, but I can't. So Amelia's big time. All right, big time. Um, but fantastic. Yeah, we're not going to go into the whole like Peter Gabriel big time. Um,
Great reference. I just want you on
but
here to make references for me from here on out. Just come
oh
back
yeah,
and
I
just
I'm
pop in
I
and make
am
reference.
I am a walking verbal meme. Um, so so yeah, she's fantastic. Our interior artist, I was working with a, I guess for lack of a better term, I think he was like a rep. So I didn't really get to talk to the artist. I was like talking to one person who was then coordinating with the artist.
Okay.
So Diego, who was the artist, I don't think I've ever actually had a conversation with Diego simply because there was this sort of middleman.
Okay.
And I mean, a lot of people have reps. I mean,
Yeah.
that's fine. It was just to me, it was a little odd because I'm so used to talking directly to the artist. Also, whenever you have another person in the mix, you get like sometimes you get the telephone, the game of
Yeah.
telephone.
Yeah.
Um, but I was someone reached out to me about doing a legacy of Mandrake, and I had been familiar who Mandrake the magician was. Um, but I was like, if you look at that old Mandrakes, the Leaf Falk stuff, I mean, some of it's a little icky because it's very dated.
Yeah.
And so I was reaching, someone reached out to me about doing it, and I said, if I were to be brought onto this, it sounds interesting, but if I were to be brought onto this, there's a lot of things. I know you want to reference a lot of the old stuff, for longtime fans, but there's a lot of stuff we cannot go anywhere near, and I refuse to go anywhere near.
Yeah.
And they said, no, we get it, we totally understand. They had already had some ideas of where they wanted the story to go
Okay.
because I think this studio had been developing it. And so when they came to me, they kind of gave me some sort of half-baked stuff. And I kind of like looked through that and said, all right, I can work with this, I can work with that. Let's add in this. And it's like baking a cake, Are you gonna, use a can of Coca-Cola, or are you gonna use, canola oil?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Two completely different things.
No, well, I don't know if there's like a Coca-Cola recipe book and you could like put a can of Coca-Cola in your cake batter.
I know
You
people have used it for cake, but
Yeah.
other things, yeah. You mean in place of? Well, that's beside the point.
I don't know if it's in place. I'm not the baker, but
Oh,
I don't know if
okay.
it's in place. But I do know that like there are some people that'll be like, oh, we'll add a little dash of vanilla. And somebody's like, screw it, we're gonna put a can of Coke in there and flavor or cherry Coke. Because I
Yeah.
know there's like a cherry Coke cake or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah. That sounds
Somebody's
delicious.
mom made it for a birthday party or graduation party 30 years ago. I just remember that and just being like, who puts cherry Coke in a cake? Shows what I know. Um, and so they came to me with kind of like half baked ideas, and I don't mean that disparagingly. I mean it's just like they had, well, maybe we could do this, maybe we could do that, whatever. And I sort of picked and chose what I liked from each of them, and tried to sort of streamline it into a coherent story.
Yeah.
So we did an online exclusive story that was like an oversized 30 to 34 page story. And then, and the problem was that that story wasn't released in print. And then we did the 4 issues. We did a 4 issue miniseries that didn't 100% tie back to that story, but it hinted at it. And there was a weird way, and this is where it comes down to the game of telephone. There was the release dates didn't really work out so much. So
Okay.
issue number 1 came out before issue number 0,
Okay.
and not all of the reviewers were really kind, put it nicely.
Oh no.
Like it was like, what the hell is she referencing? Like, what is she talking about? Because I would have like a little asterisk with like a little call out saying, check out issue number 0, and people are like, what's issue number 0? So it was not too great. What probably wasn't my best reviews. But when the trade came out and it came out in print, they printed the 0 issue with it.
Okay.
So so it reads much better when you read the trade. Um, but I mean, it was a fun story. It's like YA, magic, and you know kids just being kids. Like the way I sort of log lined it was, Mandy is a typical teenager who has to navigate high school, college applications, and these weird zombie creatures kidnapping people in her small town.
Okay.
And that's basically it.
And
So,
then she has to deal
she's
with all that.
yeah, so we've got, the teenage drama,
Yeah.
and we've got the, sneaking into the high school late at night because, you've cast a tracking spell on somebody and they disappeared 3 days ago, and all of a sudden your tracking spell is, picking up in the old gymnasium.
Okay. Nice. That's great.
So
You've also done comic books, and I'll just touch on them a little bit here because we want to talk about some of your upcoming stuff. You've done some TV tie-in comics, Xena,
yes,
Charmed.
I did Xena and Charmed. Yes,
Uh, wasn't Secrets of Emily
Revenge.
Thorne? Wasn't the Secrets of Emily Thorne something that was TV related as well?
Yes, there was a TV show. It was actually my first Marvel work. It was a show called Revenge. It was on ABC and it was the first Marvel work I had. I wrote the OGN prequel to the first season. And that was a weird situation because I was kind of co-writing with one of the producers and writers of the show. Marvel was cutting the checks, but ABC was giving me my marching orders. And not everybody in TV really understands how comics work.
Right.
So I there was a part of me that was like, I know I'm not super experienced in this yet, but I know they don't know what they're talking about.
Right.
And I mean, that's far worse. I mean, I'm editorializing. That's far worse than it was, but there are sometimes, and since then, I mean, I've dealt with plenty of people who are in television and film, and they don't get like the process of comics because, you know, TV and film are made in the editing suite.
Right.
You shoot all this coverage and then you cut together the story. Whereas comics, you've got to get your script down, and then that's what gets drawn. Like you can't. It's not like storyboarding,
Yeah.
where every frame is the same size
Yeah.
you know um so I've run up against that multiple times with clients who are film clients or television clients, and trying to explain and explain again and then tell the editor, they'll bring an editor in, and then you tell the editor, please, for the love of God, explain it to them, and they'll say, I have, and they don't get it. um so I always suggest, there was a great article that NPR did. There was a group of people for NPR Money, I think it was, and they wanted to throw together a comic and they thought that it was going to be easy and they realized that it was going to be hard. And I mean, God bless them for thinking that it was going to be easy, but God bless them more for turning around and saying, you know what, we messed up and we're going to write this article about how we messed up,
Yeah.
all of our misconceptions, and they basically said, here's egg on our face. Learn from our mistakes. So every time I work with someone who's in TV or film and have never done comics before and have absolutely no clue and are totally pushing back on everything that I'm saying about, no, there's a very specific pipeline. There's a very specific process. You're putting the cart before the horse in every one of those idioms. I send them this NPR article. I'm like, read this. It still doesn't make a difference.
How did I know you were going to say that? It still doesn't. I knew it.
Well, it's funny though, because in any creative pursuit, you know how they say you've got the two wolves inside of you, whatever. In any creative pursuit, you're dealing with, this is the greatest thing I've ever created. I'm right, and this is garbage, and it's going to fail, and I'm horrible. And those
Yeah.
are the two wolves that are at least inside me. And when you're coming up against television or film people, they have the same idea of, I know what I know, and I know that this is the story that I want to tell. Whether or not that story may be telegenic, that story might not do well in comics. Here's a case in point. Did you see the film Ad Astra?
I did not.
Okay. Ad Astra, I think, would have made a great comic because there are a lot of scenes where it is basically just BO of Brad Pitt's character, not necessarily narrating, but talking about his feelings. It's all like inner monologue. Not all
Okay.
of it, obviously, but a good portion is inner monologue. And you could have taken 10 minutes of all this inner monologue stuff and done just a splash page of space and just captions. Because I didn't think that that film was very telegenic. It wasn't very interesting to watch,
Okay.
but it would have been interesting to read
To
as a
read.
comic visually, I think.
Okay.
There are many people that could probably disagree with me, and that's fine. But some concepts don't always work in the medium that you want to put them in. And unfortunately, there is this ill-conceived notion that a comic book is a storyboard, and it's not.
Yeah.
Because if you've ever worked in advertising, you've ever worked in film, you've ever worked in television, your storyboard is your guide. Your storyboard is not your gospel.
Right.
And if you ever watch any of the behind the scenes moments of films or TV, you'll see the storyboard is up and you will literally see the director or one of the writers start moving things around.
Yeah.
You can't do that in comics because whereas in television or film, you have a fixed aspect. Okay. You have a horizontal panel. Okay. In comics, you can have horizontal panels. You can have vertical panels. You could have splash, which is vertical. You could have square panels, circle panels, triangle panels, any kind of
Yeah.
panels you want.
Explosive little star panel.
Explosive little star panels, anything you want. You could have diagonal panels. I mean, look at the double page spread in Hallows Eve #1 that Mike Dowling did. I mean, you've got Hallows Eve going diagonally across, and you have all these panels of random sizes and random angles. You can't do that in film. I mean, unless you do the whole like Hulk, Incredible Hulk Ang Lee, where you have panels coming in and panning and tilting and everything. But a lot of times, because they are so focused on this aspect, 1920 by 1080 basically, which is your HD,
Mm-hmm.
they can't see anything outside of that. And they think, oh, you just draw a bunch of widescreen panels and then we'll just move them around. Doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, when you are writing television, if you're writing broadcast, you're writing for the commercial break. If you're writing for comics, you're writing for the page turn. And pacing is very different. A 20-page comic, if you have a 20-page teleplay for a sitcom, 22 pages or whatever,
Yeah.
that's supposed to be 1 page per minute. A 20-page comic is not a 20-minute read. It could be a longer read, it could be a shorter read. And that's something that I kind of had, like, I remember writing a 22-page comic, and one of the TV people said, this was too short of a read. It's 22 pages. It should be 22 minutes. And I'm like, it's not how comics work.
Right.
And
it'll take them
it
22 minutes maybe to read it if they want to.
Yeah, if you want to pour over the art, which you should be doing to
Mhm.
begin with. But you could have a 22-page comic that takes you 45 minutes to read. If you have one of these like giant double splash, Brian Hitch, backgrounds with 4,000 characters, or this, or Scott Koblish just did this, I think it's like 3 or 4 connecting covers of like 700 characters for Fantastic Four kind of thing. Yeah, that's like a 4-hour read.
Yeah.
Because you're sitting there with like, with the glasses off, like trying to look at every single person.
Yeah, see who's in there, the little cameos,
who's
little
in
secrets.
there. Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, there's Mole Man, kind of thing. But it doesn't always translate the same thing. And getting back to the sort of the two wolves is, a lot of times people will know their medium very, very well, and they will assume that trumps everything else.
Yeah.
And so, they'll come in and be like, well, I know what to do. It's like, yeah, if you're making a film, I'm not stepping on your toes. You're making a comic, you kind of you have to check your ego.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult to, and I'm the first person to admit this. I am like the biggest narcissist and like the worst enemy of myself in the world at the same time. It's like, this is the greatest thing ever. You're a failure.
Yeah.
But those are the two wolves. And you're dealing with that with creative people. And what I found a lot of times, especially when I was teaching, is people will come to you with a script or come to you with a comic, and they do not want a critique. They want an endorsement. Um, and it
But
doesn't
you don't
matter
learn that
whether
way. You don't learn that way.
people don't. You think people want to learn? People don't want to learn. People want to be told that their pursuit is viable, but also that their pursuit is, um, what's the word? Transformative. This isn't just a comic.
This changed
This
my
is the
life.
greatest comic I've ever read in my entire life.
Right.
They don't want honesty without understanding that art, which comics, whether it's the writing or the coloring, the line work, whatever, it is all art is subjective.
Yeah.
Yes, there are technical parts to it, but art's subjective. There are some very popular artists that sell really well that I cannot look at their art. There's something about it, it just doesn't resonate with me. Does that mean that they're bad artists?
No.
No, it just means that I cannot resonate with that. It doesn't hit my funny bone. Whereas there are other people I'll have a conversation and be like, this is the greatest book I've ever read. You need to pick up so and so. And I'm like, oh, I picked up their other thing and I wasn't a big fan of the art. Is there a different artist on it? And they're like,
Right.
no. It's like, well, you enjoy it, and that's
Yeah.
fantastic.
And I've been there myself plenty of times where it's like I read something and they're like, I'm like, yeah, and they're like, no, but this is so amazing. But there are also other times where I've looked at something. A great one was the Hawkeye series that the series was based off of. I looked at it and I was like, meh, and they're like, no, just give it a shot. And I'm like, I looked through it and they're like, no, just sit down and read it. I was like, okay, you're my friend. I'll sit down and read it. And I got through it and I was like, and it became like my favorite. And then the series happened. I was like, I can't wait till that series comes out because it
Oh,
looks like they're
the
taking
David
so,
Aja and Matt Fraction, yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I was like, that was so great. But it wasn't my type, like that's not my type of art. That's not the type of art I personally like to look at. But then when I got to it and I saw how the story was written, it worked really well with the art and it changed my entire perspective.
Yeah, I mean, there are certain things that there are creators, because writers and artists, there are creators that I've read some of their stuff and I'm like, meh. I've read other stuff and I'm like, wow, they did really well on this. Is this an outlier? Or is the stuff that I really liked the outlier, back and
Yeah.
forth kind of thing. Um, and I always try and give everything a try. There are very few creators that I'll be like, I'm not picking this up, because every time I pick up their book, I'm disappointed. Or there are other creators that are like, I have to pick this up because every time I pick up this book, it's greater than the last book I read by them.
Yeah. We should talk about picking up a book. We should talk about picking up. You've got a couple books coming up, right?
Which book do you want to pick up?
You've got Deadliest Bouquet trade paperback coming out on
Yes.
April 19th, right?
Yes.
And then you've got Hallows Eve
From
number
Image.
2 and X-23 are both coming
Number
out
2.
April 12th, right?
Yes, from Marvel. And Deadliest Bouquet is coming out from Image.
Okay. So people can go and check those out. And also you've got a Kickstarter you're going to be working on here pretty soon, right?
Yes, March 28th, we are launching a Kickstarter for a story called Christabel. In 1797, Samuel Taylor Coleridge wrote a poem called Christabel, and it was supposed to be 5 parts, and he only wrote 2 of them. And I have been obsessed with this poem since my sophomore year in college, and my English major is showing, and that is fine. Um, so there's basically 2 poems from I studied British Romantic poetry. That was my concentration. You want to talk about getting esoteric, in Xanadu de Tublicana stately a pleasure dome decree. Um, and I there are 2 poems that have really haunted me, and the other one I've been writing a sci-fi adaptation of a poem by Robert Browning from 1836. But this Christabel poem was really interesting because there were these 5 parts planned, and it's an epic poem, so it does tell a very long story.
Okay.
And the legend goes that Coleridge and Williams Wordsworth were writing partners. They were writing a series of books called Lyrical Ballads, and I think the first edition had the first part of Christabel, the second edition had the second. But the legend goes that Wordsworth basically said to Coleridge, I don't think that this poem is really up to our standards or the standards that people expect of us. And that kind of gave Coleridge, stage fright. And so he never finished parts 3, 4, and 5. The problem is that it's on this giant cliffhanger. And nobody that no research that I've done and the people that I've spoken to have ever turned up so much as an outline for 3, 4, 5. So nobody knows where the story was going to go.
Okay.
And if there are any Coleridge scholars out there, and if you know of an outline of 3, 4, and 5, please let me know. I would love to look at it at least. Like if there's like scans and stuff, I would love to take a look.
Yeah.
But nobody has really come across, because you know how they'll come across the letters and the folios of a famous creator, and they'll be like, oh, look at it. I haven't heard about anybody coming across any of this stuff, and I could be totally wrong. I'm not an academic, but nobody I've spoken to has heard of it. So I have been milling in my head what could happen. And so what I decided to do was, you know what, I have a platform and I have a career that is literally making things up.
Yeah.
So I took the foundation of the first 2 parts of the story. There are a few things that I changed, like in the poem, her father is a baron, and in the comic, her father is a king. So I've, and she's like a young noblewoman, but she's not a princess. And in our comic, because her father's a king, she's a princess. So I changed a few things up, but the main core story is still there. And so what we did was we brought the story into 10 years after the initial meeting. Christabel's a young woman, and she meets this other young woman who's a few years older named Geraldine. And we take the story 10 years after that meeting, because in the poem, you start getting these interesting sense of like Geraldine, she might be a witch, she might be a sorceress, there's something not so right with her. So what happened 10 years later? Well, 10 years later, Christabel, because Geraldine is a witch and a sorceress, has bewitched her father, and Christabel's been banished.
Oh.
So when we start, you've got 25-year-old Christabel instead of 14, 15-year-old, working as a mercenary and a bounty hunter.
Okay.
So a far cry from where we first meet her.
Yeah.
And especially a far cry from when we meet her in the poem. And she has a singular purpose, and that is survival. And her secondary purpose is, I'm going to scour the 6 territories to find anything to kill this witch to go home. Because there's no way that she's going to be let back home with that woman still in the house.
Yeah.
And along the way, other people who have been carrion for Geraldine have also, one of the major players is this knight who used to be a knight in her father's court, and he was very close to her father. They were almost like brothers.
Okay.
And Geraldine turns the king against him.
Oh.
So a few years after Christabel's banished, he is then banished. And he's looking for her. He can't find her. And then he is literally, set to begging because he has nothing left. So you have this princess who's not, the finest of things, but, living one life and then forced to live another. You have this very noble, dignified knight forced to literally beg on the streets, and they end up finding each other. And it is a redemption for each other, because she was upset with him that he didn't fight harder when she was getting banished. And, it's just sort of they sort of reinforce each other. So we get like a third of the way through the story, and you see that she's, down on her luck. And then when she finds her friend Wajun, it's like, okay, now she has new
People.
life in her.
Yeah.
Um, and then they end up meeting a third person named Roland that sort of brings into their little, trio. And it's like, all right, we've got our people, and that's the end of volume one. And they have their mission, and their mission is we're gonna go find something and we're gonna kill this witch.
Nice.
So yeah,
That's
so
awesome.
I've outlined volumes 2 and 3. We're doing the Kickstarter on March 28th for volume one, which is a 60-page story. It'll be about 72 to 76 pages with back matter and stuff.
Yeah. And for those that are listening, you can go to kickstarter.com/projects/Erica Schultz writes /Christabel and Christabel volume -1. But you can just look
Yes.
up Erica Schultz writes on there as well and just follow, and you'll get everything, or on Twitter and all of the social medias, Twitter and Instagram, which we'll talk about here in a second. So do
Yeah,
you know
it's
what
the
do you have like a plan? Do you like, is it for the full run of the story? Is that what the Kickstarter is for? What are you going to do for, like, do you have stretch goal plans or
I
any of
have
that kind of
stretch goal
stuff?
plans. I do. I have stretch goal plans. One of the stretch goal plans is which is, I mean, part of me thinks it's like really kitschy and funny, but another part of I have a friend who's helping with the Kickstarter, Jaslyn Stone, who's a fantastic marketer. She might turn around and be like, "What the hell are you talking about?" So I have my original book from college right
Okay.
here, and as you can see, the corners are very worn,
Yeah.
and and it's amazing
Bookmarks all over the place.
well, these are the little flags from the little whatchamacallit flags, post-it flags.
Yeah.
And it's so old that the glue is kind of like like they're not
Not
coming
sticking.
off. No, they're not coming off. They're not coming off these pages at all,
Oh,
because
they're
I'm
like
afraid if I
adhered
try,
permanently. They're
yeah,
forged to the pages.
they're pretty permanently, and I have one here that says Christabel. It's difficult to see, but it says Christabel, and
Yep.
on the other
Yep.
side it says Coleridge. And I have my notes in the margins
Oh wow. There are lots
from
of notes for those
college.
that are listening. There are a ton of little notes written in the margins.
And so one of my kitschy stretch goals I thought would be I would scan these pages in, and I would say this is 19, 18, 19-year-old Erica's analysis
Yeah.
of this poem from when I first, I mean, obviously it's from
Maybe you shouldn't be showing us, because
1797.
now we can see it, and
Yeah, you can't really see it. You just
you're
see a
giving it
bunch of
away for
like
free. Just kidding. Yeah, I
see
think
a
that's a cool
bunch of
idea, so
little
people can
like
see those.
colorful, things. Um, but I mean, to me, that's always kind of a fun thing to do, because like process pages and things like that in the back of books, I think are always really fun, simply because um you can sort of watch the wheels turn
Yeah.
and sort of see how things progressed. Um, but yeah, I mean, I'm sure there are some analyses here that academics would be appalled by, uh, but I have not changed them
But those
since.
academics aren't writing an awesome comic book series, so they can just be appalled and walk away and go sign up on the Kickstarter, right?
I mean, but it's funny though, because I've reread these, but I haven't changed them. I haven't added to them since 1996.
Wow.
So it is like as raw can get. And there's a part of me that's like, ooh, go. And I'm like, nope, don't
You know what you could
leave
do?
it.
You could just get a fresh copy, and without looking at those notes, go through and write some notes, and then compare like your now and then notes.
I don't know. I mean, like there's literally like stains on this book. Like there are literal stains on, I mean, look at the edges of this book.
That's a well-worn book. That's a
This
well-loved
is
book.
this is the Norton's Anthology of English Literature. This is a very sixth edition, volume two. I have volume one on the on the the shelf in the back, but this is a very well worn book, um, and with all my little notes.
Yeah.
And I think that, oh my God, is that actually a receipt from back in the day? Is that a receipt?
It's a
Let's look. Let's
Blockbuster
see.
receipt for those
No,
that.
I'm not joking. It's Sprint.
Oh my gosh.
It's a receipt from my Sprint phone bill that we had Sprint in college. And
Wow.
what's written on it? What it says? Oh, Wordsworth, we are 7. Yes. Yes, it is a Sprint receipt.
The best way to
Or
take notes.
part
I
or
need a piece
part
of
of
paper. I need a piece of paper. Rip
it's
off
part
an
of an
envelope or a
envelope.
receipt. Yeah.
It literally is part of the security envelope. It is part of a security envelope from
that's
Sprint.
that's great. I love
So
it.
there you go. Wordsworth, we are 7. Yes, a simple child that lately draws its breath. There you go.
I love it. You've got some upcoming appearances. You're going to be at the comic shop in Wilmington, Delaware on March 22nd.
Yes. Doing
You'll
a
be at the
signing.
London Film and Comics Con in July 7th and 9th. And there's some other that are kind of still pending. Yes?
Still pending, yes. I am waiting to hear about Dragon Con and I'm waiting to hear about New York Comic Con. But I will be at New York Comic Con come hell or high water, whether I have a table or not. I will be there.
Awesome.
If I have to like stand outside with a picket sign, I will be there.
Great, great, great. So people that are listening and watching, you can go ahead and check out Erica Schultz at all of those locations. Go to her website, which I have right here in front of me. It's ericaschultzwrites.com. So go and check out all of her works, all of her stuff that we mentioned earlier. Amazing comics. You have some amazing artists that work with you. You can be found on Twitter at Erica Schultz 42 and on
Yep.
Instagram, Erica Schultz Writes. So you can be found there. He posts all
I'm
kinds
also
of
on
stuff.
Hive and Spoutable at Erica Schultz 42 and Mastodon at Erica Schultz 42 at toot.site, which just sounds like farts. But,
Toot.
toot.site. Yes.
Awesome. Well,
But the
thank
people
you.
in Mastodon are pretty cool, so.
Thank you so much for hanging out. Stick around, chat. We're going to do some of your Q&As. You had some good questions and comments in there, so we'll get to those here in a moment. I want to tell you about some of our upcoming guests. March 13th, we're going to have author Michelle Franklin. She's wrote a bunch of fun books, including the Freywin books, as well as the Monsters Holiday Kids books, such as Werewolves Don't Celebrate Hanukkah, The Orc Who Saved Christmas, and the new book coming out soon, Dragons Don't Celebrate Passover. That podcast will be available March 14th. April 10th, comic book writer and artist Otis Frampton, known for his Oddly Normal series, has also worked on Star Wars Adventures, the DC Comics kid books, and so many more. That podcast will be available April 11th, so make sure you join us for those episodes. Also, check out our sponsor, HelloFresh. If you like good food and you like to cook, even if you don't and you want to learn something more, you go to HelloFresh.com and use our code POGHF102212 to get 60% off your first order. Again, HelloFresh.com, use code POGHF102212 for 60% off your first order. I want to thank all of you for joining us and listening, and thanks again to Erica Schultz for joining us. Make sure to check out her upcoming stuff, including Christabel on Kickstarter. So please make sure to rate, review, push all the buttons. It helps us, and it helps our guests. For Erica Schultz, I am Nick, and thank you all for listening to Epic Realms.